All right. If you could please take your seats, we're going to get started. Great. So before we start up again, I just want to let everyone know that we're going to go until 10:30 tonight, and then we do have another hearing scheduled on this topic on May 23rd, starting at 6:30 p.m. So hopefully if you don't get a chance to speak tonight, you can speak then. And if you're not available on May 23rd and would like to speak tonight, please either let our clerk know or raise your hand at this time, and I can make sure that you'll be able to speak. Okay, if you could, is there anyone who's not available on May 23rd who would like to speak? Okay, if you could please give your name to our clerk and she can write it down and give me a list. And we have about a dozen slips left. And also, if you have spoken or plan to speak and have written comments, it would be great if you could, if you'd be able to submit those to our clerk, because then she can make sure that they are included in the minutes. Okay. So we'll start up with Beth Grossman.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity, council members and mayor. I've been attending and watching Baylands Planning Commission and City Council meetings since 2004. Now that we're coming to close to the end of the presentations and opportunities for public hearings, I'm left with many unanswered questions. Today I put out an email to my Brisbane neighbors asking them what questions they have about the Baylands development. I made this scroll to make some of our questions visible. They're vast, and there are many more out there, and we're inviting all of you here to write them down on the bright cards out in the lobby and put them up tonight as you're on your way out, because it'd be really great to get everybody's voices here. Our list of questions is long, and the time allotment will not allow me to read aloud all of my neighbors' questions, but here are some of mine. What are the actual plans for remediations of the toxins? Is it truly safe for housing? And would we be willing to raise our children on the Baylands? Is there going to be truly affordable housing? What are the plans for size and price? What are the income levels that will be able to afford them? I've seen Lennar advertisements on BART listing Bayview affordable housing starting at $600,000 per 600 square feet plus per unit plus HOA. What is the economic benefit for Brisbane if we have to maintain the roads, police, fire, school, and public works? What is the liability for the city of Brisbane for future health problems or effects of earthquakes or sea level rise on the development? Where is the water going to come from? How are we going to deal with the traffic and the impact of all of this development on our ability to get in and out of Brisbane? How are we going to deal with the noise from the endless pile driving that will go on year after year? Many of you remember what it was like for 3 weeks when they were fixing the Caltrain bridge. This is probably 20 years. What about the tank farm? Is there an evacuation plan in the event of an earthquake or fire? What is in that dirt that's being recycled and piled higher on a daily basis out there in the Baylands? And last but not least, how is the Baylands development being coordinated with Candlestick, Hunters Point, India Basin, Bayview, and San Francisco development just north of Recology, and all that's going on in South San Francisco along the 101 corridor? This is one of the most important decisions and development projects that the city of Brisbane will make. Why are we rushing this? The formal city council meeting format doesn't seem conducive for citizens to truly discuss and work together to find solutions to the myriad of remediation, transportation, housing, and safety problems together with our elected officials and community. And I just heard that Cliff is planning on hosting something on Tuesday night. Thank you for that. I urge the council to plan more community meetings like that, where we can get to the heart of the unanswered questions before we make any decisions that we might regret from generations to come. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Beth. Laura Clark.
The wedding aisle.
Hi, Laura Clark, from all the way over in foreign San Francisco, your nearest neighbors. I live in an area of San Francisco that feels very much like some areas of Brisbane because we are neighbors. Many of the people who live in Brisbane work in San Francisco. Many of the people who, these communities are interconnected. We are part of a regional Bay Area. We rely upon each other. And we are all relying upon everybody taking part of the housing burden. I'd like everybody who's struggling with housing in San Francisco to stand up. And I'd like someone who used to live in Brisbane, can wave. Yep. And somebody who has kids is here today, which is a rarity in the Bay Area. They've brought their kid here to make it clear to you that we need housing for the next generation. Millennials are literally putting off having children because of the lack of housing. We are a stunted generation. And I want people to realize that they are excluding their own children from joining this community. There is a reason that Brisbane is getting older. There is a reason that the entire Bay Area is suffering from this housing crisis. It is because people are being forced out further and further and further away. And it is a regional crisis. And I think that each of you have personal experiences with this because everyone is touched by this. Everyone has, somebody who has a millennial living in their basement. Everybody has somebody they know who had to move to Arizona because they couldn't find housing here. Everybody has somebody in their life who just couldn't deal anymore and picked up and left, and it was a crisis and a tragedy for them. And we shouldn't continue to allow that to take place. It is not healthy to have commutes be this long. It is not healthy to have there be this much opportunity in this region and to say, we don't want it. There is an opportunity here to build housing and build your community and do it right on transit. There is a chance for your community to grow. And the new people who will join this community will help you make it even more awesome. Everything that you love about Brisbane will be something that each one of those new residents loves and joins your community for. And they will help you grow your school. They will help you deal with the transit things. And they will come out to these meetings and fight for Brisbane because they will be members of your community. They will be neighbors and they will join you in advocating for your community. And all you have to do is say yes to them and to accept them into your community. They want to live there. I have one question at the end of this. I understand they have lots of other questions. Most of them have been answered, but I have one question. Where are we going to live? We have jobs, and that's great. But where are we going to live if we continue to chronically underbuild housing? And it's not just going to be in San Francisco. We all need to do our part and build housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Corey Smith.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council. I'll keep it very, very brief. San Francisco has dramatically underbuilt housing for the last 30 years. It's something that we all take very seriously. San Francisco also has two different kinds of housing advocates. We have affordable housing advocates who only push for affordable housing, and then we've got across-the-board housing advocates because we believe we need to be building everything. And that's the significant majority of people here that we came with. And the significant majority of these folks as well, many of them can't afford market rate rents in the new buildings that they're advocating for, but they take a bigger picture view of it. Next Monday night, a bunch of the people that we came with are going to be advocating for a piece of legislation that's going to add 16,000 additional homes in San Francisco. I realize scale is a big difference, but they walk the walk and talk the talk at the same time. Counting the people that just stood up there was 24 and a half or so. There are 4 of us that are paid to do this. Everybody else is a volunteer spending their Thursday night here. Thank you.
Thank you. Prem Lau.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council members. My name is Prem Lau, Brisbane resident for about 15 years now. So one of the topics that has been discussed here tonight numerous times is how increasing the housing supply will lower the pricing so that it'll be more affordable to live here. And there's a topic that I've discussed here previously, which I'd like to address once again, and it is why that logic, that increasing housing will bring down prices is not necessarily correct for the times. And that is because of the incidence of short-term rentals, such as Airbnb and its competitors. So when you have housing increases and those the long-term rentals that formerly were on the market are cannibalized and turned into short-term rentals that then have these exorbitant prices for visitors to the San Francisco Bay Area instead of people who live here. That unfortunately results in a situation in which housing is taken off the market, even if new housing is built, because the point is that everyone wants to visit San Francisco, and people who know that they can get their hands on that new housing, they will buy it all up and then convert it into short-term rentals so that people who want to visit the San Francisco Bay Area will then rent those short-term rentals. They have a lot of money to spend, so they will fill the pockets of the landlords of those short-term rentals. And people who formerly used to live in the city in long-term rentals will be kicked out either by questionable evictions or they will simply be priced out of the market. Now, San Francisco has regulations on rental rates. San Mateo County doesn't have any regulations. There's nothing that prevents a landlord from jacking up the amount being charged for rent. So San Francisco is different from San Mateo in many ways. And also, now San Francisco, for instance, welcomed short-term rentals, Airbnb and so forth, and then got sued when they tried to regulate those short-term rental companies. The same thing goes for, I think it was Anaheim and several other localities in California. So if you're thinking, okay, well, we're going to put these new housing units onto the market, and we'll see what to do after the fact if these people start turning them into short-term rentals. We'll try to regulate them once that starts happening. What actually will result is that once these short-term rental companies, Airbnb and their friends, get their foot in the door, they sue you. And you end up in court with all kinds of fees and money that is flowing out of the city's coffers to fight against these companies. And they have lots of money. So I just wanted to bring that point to light. So thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Scharfman.
Madam Mayor, council members, thank you very much for hearing the comments tonight and my own. Ms. Padilla, would you please back up in the presentation to the slide that showed the land use, the CPP and the DSP land use comparisons, please? One dilemma I can really appreciate that. Please go backwards. Go backwards to the table. Okay. Oh, yeah. We can leave it. We can leave it there. Thank you. One of the dilemmas that I can really appreciate is very difficult in this situation for you as decision makers is that regardless of the different opinions about what to do with this piece of land or the facts that inform those opinions, regardless of what side of the debate that you're on, it is without a doubt there is a disconnect between state policy that was years in the making, regional plans to implement that policy, and your local responsibilities, which are, as evidenced by the comments tonight, are really at odds. And so a little bit of a history lesson there. The Assembly Bill 32 that refers to, from page 17 of your staff report, refers to Senate Bill 375. The origin of Senate Bill 375 was Assembly Bill 32, which required the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of California from many portions of the pie. And I just want to, for the record, remind the council that at the same time that hundreds of state employees spent millions upon millions of our tax dollars to determine that placing 80% of new housing on transit lines and really correcting the jobs housing imbalance that's pushed more people to the fringes of the Bay Area to live while the jobs were getting created here. Those same decision makers passed a bill that called for the energy industry to produce up to 50% of the energy consumed by Californians through renewables by 2030. And coincidentally, at that time, the head of decision-making for procurement for that requirement for PG&E was presented with the opportunity to do utility scale energy production on the Baylands. And I was there with Ms. Miller and the Krebel, some other representatives from the Krebel group, and we were told that the environmental cleanup on the Baylands site, combined with the uncertainties around the day-to-day exposure to sun in comparison to the vast sites that they had available in the Central Valley, was pushing them to meet that standard elsewhere. So I just want to remind you, one of the reasons we really do not take and will not take the opinion of the Planning Commission very seriously is because it flies in the face of feasible reason. Now, with a disagreement, I want to offer an agreement, which is that we agree with the City Council's recommendation for 19 acres of utility-scale independent solar production on the Baylands. That's in the CPP and in the DSP, and it's in a comparison in one of these tables. And so I just wanted just a bit of a historical reminder. It was This is state policy on two of the most important issues that you're considering. And those policies were very well thought through and driving some of the issues on these decisions. Really quickly, I'll also say that the PC recommendation for 2 million square feet on 680 acres, another reason we believe it shouldn't be taken seriously by the council, is that it requires major benefits like the closure of the landfill and the tens of millions of dollars required for that just to put parks in, just to put utility scale renewable energy in. And so the feasibility of such an approach is just very difficult to prove. And what I would say by comparison is that if you look at the Schlegel Lock site, by comparison, 2 million square feet on 20 acres with remediation, with parks for that community, with retail for the community, and with grocery store. So by comparison, you have 2 million square feet on 20 acres, 2 million square feet on 680 acres. That's just something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Hexter. Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I'm a former resident of San Mateo County, in part priced out because of the shortage of housing here. But I also am professionally a consultant in the area of renewable energy, and I am, instead of advocating for the plan of putting utility scale solar here on this here in Brisbane, I would like to strongly recommend the housing proposal, put forward by Paramount, and I think that unfortunately the use of renewable energy as a kind of an environmental, let's say, excuse, or I don't know. I wouldn't. Anyway, I really am objecting to that because I'm a strong advocate for renewable energy, but I think that basically housing and locating housing close to where people work, among other things, will reduce our emissions a lot more than simply putting a solar farm here where we don't have very good sun. So many people have said what I think in other presentations in support of the housing proposal, so I just like to put my voice in favor of the housing proposal.
Thank you. Karen Cunningham.
Madam Mayor, City Council, Karen Cunningham, Brisbane resident for many, many years. I just want to bring something up that over many years I've heard this and that and this and that, and I kind of disagree with all of it at this point, so I want you to think about it. The sustainability of this project and the sustainability of anything that we do moving forward. I've done some research, and I'm not going to let you know what my answers are to that research tonight, but I will put that to the City Council at some point moving forward. When we talk about sustainability, and it's kind of the buzzword for people who want their point to be heard, is that is it more sustainable to have a whole bunch of small homes, small apartments with an individual person living in them? Or is it more sustainable to have 6 adults living in a larger home? I've done my research on it. I know what that looks like, but I don't think we're going down the right track with what we're looking at here, with hundreds and hundreds of units with one person living in them. So we might want to rethink this whole thing completely. Frankly, I think it's a better idea that we have a larger building with more people living in that one larger building. From a sustainability perspective, it looks to me to be a much better answer. And when we're talking about sustainability and, providing affordability to anything we do in our town moving forward, at what cost and to whom? Is it going to be beholden to the property owners to provide affordable housing, or is this something that we should be looking at for funding from other areas? I don't think it should be beholden on the property owners. I think it should be for us to look at other areas to find out where we can find affordable housing in our communities. I agree we should, and I'm really completely disappointed at this point to think that in Brisbane, I believe, this might be not correct, but I believe we have one police officer who lives here, a couple of teachers, and no firefighters who live in Brisbane, who serve our town. So in the event of an emergency, we're kind of on our own at so many levels. So I don't think we're looking holistically at the picture. I think there are people who say everybody should be living in a small home. I think there's people saying, property owners should be subsidizing the housing. The government should be subsidizing the housing. I don't think we're looking at it holistically, and I hope we can do that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Jamil Munir.
Good evening, Honorable Council. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak before you. We have done an extensive deliberation at the Planning Commission, and what I'm going to do is not going to repeat all of that here since you have the records. So I will just bring a couple of points that I would like you to consider or think about it. First and foremost is the traffic impact. I worked as a traffic engineer for the last 30 years, and I want you to make sure that you understand and review carefully the impact of the traffic as a result of 4,400 homes. Secondly, I want to talk about the transit-oriented development. Everybody talks about that. Is Caltrans really a viable transit system? They don't have enough rolling stocks. They don't have the money to improve their system. In fact, their electrification project is already in jeopardy. If you talk about the transit, we talk about the systems like one in New York, Washington, D.C., or Philadelphia, where there are underground stations everywhere. Over there, transit-oriented projects will make sense. Caltrans is not ready for that, nor is Muni. So if you're going to put all these homes there, does it make any sense? And the third point I want to make is, please do not underestimate the impact of the earthquake. We live in a seismic zone. And if you're not going to take care of the remediation of the hazardous material properly, we will face with problems later on. Liquefaction is a real concern here, and the removal of the hazardous material versus simply covering it up are the two different things, and we should really consider very carefully before we approve this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jason Quigley.
Good evening, City Council. So my name is Jason Quigley. I currently live in San Francisco. I work as a mechanical engineer, and currently I pay $1,000 a month for the privilege of sharing a house with 7 people. I would prefer to have my own home, to be able to raise a family. There has been many things said today about affordable housing, most of which I agree with, and I cannot state more succinctly. So I'm going to take off my affordable housing hat and put on my environmentalist hat. I believe that what has been proposed by the Planning Commission, far from being good for the environment, is in fact quite the opposite and will be a disaster for the local environment and for your city as a whole economically. What has been proposed is a 1960s style suburban office development. Office developments and retail and commercial, those kinds of developments, firstly, all over the country are going bankrupt because no one wants to shop in Best Buy or Walmart on the edge of cities anymore. That's the first problem. Second problem is there is already a glut of office space in this city, in the Bay Area, and a deficiency of housing. What company is going to relocate to this office complex when they would have to pay their employees $3,000 or $4,000 extra per month relative to Seattle or Portland or Austin or any number of cities in the United States? Secondly, there's already millions of square feet of office space opening up in San Francisco. How is Brisbane going to compete with that office space? Now, finally, this office space is entirely predicated on car use. We are buying into the same tired logic of the 1960s, separated uses, car-oriented development that has already been destroying the Bay Area's environment for the last 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. I would like to invite the council to, instead of thinking back in the 1960s, to think back in the 1860s, when we built communities, vibrant communities, built around walking, built around short distances, cycling, where people lived close to each other in tight-knit communities. This land is possibility. You can create any kind of community there. You can create environmentally unfriendly, economically disastrous 1960s suburbia, or you can create something much more beautiful. With that, I'll end my comments.
Thank you. Michael Goff. Guess he's left. Okay. Jonathan Randolph.
Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Jonathan Randolph. I'm a resident of San Francisco, but I live in the southern part of San Francisco, so I often, shop and commute in the area. I hope that you all think of us as part of the same community. I've heard a lot of divisive language that tries to say that we're outsiders, or that Brisbane should that we shouldn't think about them as the same community. But I think you should. We're all part of the same community. I used to catch the Caltrain. I used to bike over to the Bayshore Caltrain station when I worked on the peninsula. It's not a glamorous Caltrain station. It's not a very fast Caltrain station, but it is a Caltrain station, and it's much better than, what many people who do work in the South Bay have to commute. I mean, it's much faster than the commutes that many people have to suffer through, who, according to the, who often commute from Sacramento or Modesto or even farther away. And it would be much preferable if more people would be able to live in and near the transit corridors that can take them to their working places. And I also I think you should consider that San Francisco's problems don't stop in San Francisco. You can't, you can't say San Francisco will take care of the housing, and Brisbane can do the office development that they want to, because San Francisco's problems don't end there. You can't, if they have an affordable housing crisis and San Francisco's rents are above what any middle-class resident can pay, then the rents in Brisbane are also just as or almost as high and unaffordable to working class people. A lot of people who spoke are worried about the costs and the risks of housing, the environmental costs, for example. I hope that the city of Brisbane can work together with its neighbors to find creative ways to address these concerns. For example, some newspaper articles have incorrectly described comments by San Francisco supervisors as threatening annexation. Annexation is not a threat. There's no such thing as threatening annexation in California, because in California, under the Constitution, annexation has to be mutually agreed to by both counties. And even if so I'm sure most people won't want to, don't want to give the land to San Francisco, but I hope that Brisbane would consider creative ways of working together with its neighbors in order to address the concerns of the risks of housing and the costs. And even if you don't work together with San Francisco, Brisbane can still learn a lot from looking at the ways that San Francisco has dealt with its problems. For example, one person recently talked about complained about what Airbnb is doing in San Francisco. Well, fortunately, San Francisco has just defended its own Airbnb law, which successfully in federal court, and Brisbane can just copy that Airbnb law and solve that problem immediately just by copying the solutions that San Francisco has used. So please use creative ways to solve the problems, because we really need more housing throughout the Bay Area, and we're all one community. Thank you.
Thank you. Bobak Estaf. Don't worry about it. Bobak E.
Hi, my name is Bobak Esfandiari, and I don't speak publicly very often, and I have butterflies in my stomach, and I'm going to try to make this brief and personal. I grew up in Walnut Creek, California. I didn't choose to grow up in Walnut Creek. My parents decided they wanted to live there, and so they settled down there, and they bought a house, and they had me and my brothers. And I grew up in Walnut Creek, and there's a point to this, I swear, 5 minutes, I know. I grew up in Walnut Creek. I was told for a very long time by my peers, by my parents, by my elders, by everybody in the Bay Area, by everybody in the country, that if you work hard, you play by the same set of rules, you get a good education, you can make it in this world. I went to school at Santa Clara University, so I went from Contra Costa County down to Santa Clara County. Santa Clara University taught me a lot about the Jesuit values of being educated in the full self and working for others and being competent, conscious, and compassionate. And I learned a lot there, and I made a lot of good friends, and I got a degree in political science, and I didn't know what the hell I would do with it. And I ended up working on President Obama's re-election campaign in 2012. I opened an office in Mountain View. We made calls, we phone banked, we organized, and we got the man re-elected, and I was very proud of that. They didn't pay you very well as a field organizer, and I know the folks here in the room who are field organizers can say the same. I don't get paid very well now. I like where I work a lot, but it doesn't cover rent. And my story is that when I finally got hired for the job where I work now, I had to cut a deal with my father. My father, who was very wealthy because he was an engineer. He was a earthquake engineer for nuclear power plants, and he's made a lot of money, and he's done well in his life. And I looked and looked and looked for a place to rent so I could get out of my parents' house for months and months and months, and I couldn't find anything. And this was in 2013. And at the end of it, I came crawling back on my hands and knees and said, "Dad, can you help me?" And I was told I wouldn't have to do that, that I could work hard enough and build a life for myself, and that hasn't happened. And so I am really privileged. That is kind of like a really privileged story to tell, is that I ended up getting help from my family. They bought a condo in San Francisco, and I am now renting to my father along with another person, unrelated, but another person nonetheless. And that is not the American dream. That is not the American story. And we're not going to be able to solve the housing crisis or all of the challenges we face as a region, as a city, as a state, as a country, if we have to rely on inherited wealth and we have to rely on our parents to bail us out. I have a really privileged story, And a lot of people don't have that story. A lot of people in the county, both here and in Santa Clara County and San Francisco County, are homeless. A lot of people are commuting from miles and miles away from Davis and Vallejo and Sacramento. And this just isn't the way to live our lives. It's not the way to build our communities. And everybody else has talked about the merits of the proposals and the environment and everything else. And I think all of that's important. But I'm here talking about the need to build the plan that has housing in it, because we are never going to be able to build an equitable and just society where everybody has a shot if we all have to rely on our parents and inherited wealth and an extraordinary amount of privilege that an extraordinarily few amount of people have access to. So that's my story. It's not the most compelling story, but it's my story, and I hope you take it under advisement, because there's dozens, hundreds, millions of people like me, not only here in the Bay Area, but across the country. And this crisis is in every major metropolitan area, and we need to start thinking forward and stop worrying about what's been happening in years past. We need to look forward. So with that, thank you. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Dr. John Christopher Burr, Esquire.
You supposed to be here? Yeah, it's for the... Good evening, Madam Mayor, Honorable City Council, and esteemed residents of Brisbane. My name is John Christopher Burr, and I'm proud to be a lifelong resident of Brisbane. I was thinking back on the history of this town, and I thought about the year of 1970, 1971, 72. There was a lady, a folk singer, pretty famous, named Malvina Reynolds, who came to the Earth Day protest stage that was set up in the Saddle on San Bruno Mountain, and performed several songs. And one of the songs was, of course, Little Boxes on the Hillside, little boxes made out of ticky-tacky, and they all just looked just the same. And another one was called 70 Miles. And, of course, for those who aren't familiar with that song, if you're familiar with the hit TV show Weeds, it's the theme song for that show. And it was... that particular song was actually written about a really ugly development that the real estate speculators threw up in Daly City, and having won awards from architects for the worst, ugliest development in the country. So it was pretty ugly, according to a lot of people. So that's the Little Boxes. But the other song, the 70 Miles song, which shows 70 miles of wind and spray, 70 miles of water, 70 miles of open bay. It's a garbage dump. It was written about Brisbane and our toxic waste dump right here in front of us. And when we consider the history of it, it was, 60 to 80 years of no regulations, essentially lawless dumping, human body parts, animal parts. It took everything. It didn't care. We had, let's see, what are some of the other great things we had out here? Well, yeah, I should also say that song has been covered by Pete Seeger too, the 70 Miles song. So it's kind of popular. Maybe Brisbane doesn't want to be known as a garbage dump, and we've had to live that down for a lot of years. But I don't see any reason to hide it, especially if hiding it results in people becoming sick or injured, or permanently injured, and the town going bankrupt because of stupidity. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So for 60 to 80 years, the Balen toxic waste dump was just that. It was a toxic waste dump. Anything and everything was dumped there. Completely unregulated, anything goes, dump site. Let's see. Mountains of lead acid batteries. Mountains of vinyl chloride infested tires, which of course is a carcinogen. Metric tons of lead paint and lead painted products. And just the household hazardous waste that was dumped out there would gag a maggot. But it's worse. It's worse than that, because it took the military waste from Treasure Island and Hunters Point. And we shouldn't forget that there was a rad lab out there in Hunters Point where the Navy was carefully playing around with radioactive materials. You heard some of it here. Cesium and, what's some of the other one? Plutonium, maybe? Pardon? Right. These are really very, very nasty sorts of materials, and they really cause death. You may remember Madame Curie. I don't know if you took science or not, but she died of playing around with radioactivity, and of course it causes lesions, and that's why they put lead vests on you when you get X-rays, for example, to prevent that, hopefully. At any rate, the rad lab out there where that was, it's a building even to this day that is so polluted that these consultants and everybody, all these experts, will not touch it. They just leave it there in its radioactive state. So I guess that's going to be several hundred thousands of years of just sitting there waiting for someone to touch it and maybe die. So we have to remember, too, that the Navy, of course, was very careful in its handling of all this material and would never, ever, ever put any of it in the municipal waste stream ending up in our dump out here. I'm being facetious, of course, and, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's out there.
John, your time.
But we also have... You let all these other people talk forever.
I'm just letting you know. I just want to let you know to wrap it up, please.
That's not fair, I don't think, for you to cut me off, single me out, and allow all these people to talk for as long as they seem to want. It's not fair.
We want to make sure everyone has a chance to comment. So.
Are you saying what?
We heard your comments.
Pardon me?
You've now equalized it.
We gave you some extra time, so thank you.
Okay. Well, I would like to reserve the opportunity to amend my comments, just like they do in Congress, for the next 10 days in writing, because I think it's important that I say things that maybe you're not aware of. One thing I do want to comment on, it's really clear that with these newspaper articles, that there's scandalous going on out there in Hunters Point. I see no reason why it's not industry-wide, but consultants are willing to lie under oath and phony up reports and put that out in order to build housing on polluted sites that could kill people. And I think that's just disgusting and wrong. And I would like to remind you of your promises to put this thing on the ballot so we can decide. Because the Brisbane people will do the right thing, just like they did before when they prohibited housing on a toxic waste dump that will forever be toxic.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to let everyone know we have 4 more slips.
I think we should finish it.
I think so, too.
Yeah, motion to extend the meeting to 11. Okay with that, Terry?
All those in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
All right.
Okay. Kevin Burke.
Thanks. My name's Kevin Burke. I'm a market rate renter. I'm a small business owner. I support the housing version of the project. Since 2010, we've had 2.5 million people move to California. We've only built 400,000 units. As you can imagine, we've seen housing prices go up by a lot. The median housing price in Brisbane is now $850,000. I'm a little curious. There have been a lot of older homeowners here, and just to think about what their income was and how much their home cost when they bought their home. That number used to be about 3 or 4x. So if you were making $50,000, your home was $200,000. Right now, $850,000, that's 7 or 8x what I'm making, and I make pretty good income, I think, for my age. It's harder to save for a home too because rents are more expensive. Rents have been increasing 6% every single year on average in San Francisco for the past 2 decades or so. So you can't put as much of your money in your bank account to save up for a home. That also means that your real wage is lower. If you think about your real wages, the amount of things that you can buy with the money that you have, you can't buy as much when you're paying more in rent. I think the biggest environmental effect, there's been a lot of talk about environmental effects and global warming and everything. I think the most important environmental effect is really boring. The fastest growing areas in the Bay Area are Brentwood, Gilroy, Hercules, like way, way out in the boonies. They're growing at 5% a year. And a lot of those projects that are being built there are destroying green fields. And a lot of the people that are living there are, watering their lawns and getting up at 6:30 in the morning to drive 2 hours on the road. That's not great for the environment. San Francisco and Brisbane and the South and the Peninsula have some of the lowest water usage in the state. In addition, we have a Mediterranean climate here. That means that you don't need to run the AC a lot and you don't need to run the heater a lot, which makes it a great place for people to live, environmentally speaking. We should try to, if we're thinking about from a regional perspective, we should try to put as many people here as we can. It's really boring. You can't look at a shorter commute. It's really, you can't observe all of the people who are not traveling 2 hours a day in their cars the way that you can look at like a windmill or a solar panel or something like that. But the effect on the environment is just as important, and I'd urge you to consider it. With regards to earthquake safety, there's been a lot of elements of the periodic table being named tonight, and concerns about liquefaction. I agree it's a concern, but I also agree, I think the developer has a strong incentive to build a safe building. It's not a very good business model to build homes and then immediately watch them get liquefied and torn to the ground. Same goes with buildings that are covered in 2 feet of water. I think that would be sort of difficult to rent out. The developer shares the incentives that they don't want to build a project that would fall to the ground in the event of an earthquake, right? That's not good for their business. It's vulnerable to lawsuits. So they're going to have a very strong financial incentive to build a safe project. I also think it's an insult to the construction workers that were here to imply that they can't, or insinuate that they can't build a safe building. I don't show up to other people's workplaces and tell them that I don't think they can do their jobs that they dedicate their professions to. Anyway, that's it. Thanks very much. Please support the housing version of the project.
Thank you. Daniel Camp.
Good evening. My name is Daniel, and I have the misprivilege of being a renter in San Francisco. So I also feel that I have been very stunted and very, had my life kind of taken over by the high cost of housing in the Bay Area due to the fact that we haven't been building very much of anything for the past few decades. So I want to throw my support behind, adding a housing component to this as well. And I just want to give a short, personal twist to this. I live close to a train station in San Francisco, and my job is close to a train station. So I take the train to work. And a few years ago, I said, you know what, screw it, I'll sell my car. So now I'm one less person who's putting greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere every morning. And also, while the cost of housing is very high where I live, as we all know, the fact that I'm not paying for car insurance and gas and maintenance increases my ability to, save and support myself. If you include housing in this development, then other people will have the same opportunity that I've had where I live, to live near jobs, to live near transit, and they'll be able to drive their car less or maybe even not have a car. And this will be better for the environment because it won't produce as many greenhouse gas emissions. And even if the housing is kind of expensive, it'll still allow them to save on their overall cost of living by not paying the expenses associated with having a car. So all I want to say is please consider the significant negative impacts that this development would have if you don't include any residential component with it. And also, you can put solar panels on the top of the buildings, too. So, thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Salmon.
Michelle Salmon, also proud to be a lifelong resident of Brisbane. You've heard so many things tonight, and you've heard them numerous times. And I got Beth's email today about the list she was making. And I've read the 6,000 pages of the draft EIR and read much of the final EIR and listened to many of the testimonies. And frankly, she doesn't have a piece of paper long enough for the questions that are still open in my mind about the development and the safety issues and everything else. And I feel bad that a lot of people are not going to live the lives that we lived, because it's a different time, and the American dream isn't what the American dream was when Clark and I and John and the rest of us were little kids in Brisbane. Closure of the landfill, by the way, is not a benefit. It's an obligation that came with the property when they acquired it. It's not to be considered a public benefit that they're going to close the landfill. That is an obligation that they took on when the landfill didn't become a Superfund site as it was slated to be. So I just want to make that really clear too. And a lot of people talked about it being all one big happy community, the San Francisco Bay Area. But financially and obligation-wise, it's not. And as you well know, Brisbane will be under some serious financial obligations and with the development that goes forward, whatever it is. But the main thing I wanted to say is that besides all of the thousands of hours that your constituents have put in on this issue in terms of reading and studying and asking questions in the Planning Commission, and I hope you listen to the Planning Commission's recommendations, I actually don't think that any of the proposals that are on the table are the right ones. I don't see any of them that are. I don't want 8 million to 12 million square feet of office space, no matter how many jobs that creates. It's like 16 Transamerica pyramids right there, you know. And I certainly don't think 4,400 units of housing is going to solve the housing crisis. I don't think any of them will be low to moderate income housing. San Mateo County's median income is $125,000 now. That's a huge increase in the last 10 years from like $84,000. We are the third highest median income county in the state of California. It's not tenable, it's not sustainable. What's going on in the Bay Area is not sustainable in any way, shape, or form when you look at it. So I think that I know it's a hard thing to say, but I don't think any of these projects are the right ones. And whatever project you do decide to put forth, I hope you will honor your promise to the people of Brisbane that you will put it to a vote about housing on the Baylands to the people of Brisbane, as promised to us for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that it will be a binding thing, not subject to, oh, well, thanks for your opinion. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul Buscal.
Paul Buscal, Brisbane resident. Thank you, Council and Mayor. So, you know, I, like a lot of people in this community, have been involved for over 20 years discussing issues with the Baylands. And more recently, I was involved with the draft environmental impact report that was quite extensive, and working with the planning commissioners and others, as well as yourselves and the different BBCAG or whatever has been going on in this community and regionally. There's been a lot of information, and you know, we're not close to making a decision on what's going on with the Baylands. As far as land use goes, there's issues with the wording in the DEIR and the EIR, such as we know that 25% of the Baylands is to be set aside for open space, and it says and or open areas. And or leaves it kind of open-ended to what's it going to be. Is it going to be what percentage of open space and what percentage of open areas? Open space meaning public property and open areas meaning private property. So that's a big issue in itself. I also see that the lagoon is being mentioned as part of the open space within the Baylands, which it's not. It's my understanding that the lagoon is not part of the equation for open space and or open areas in the Baylands. So I don't know why it's being brought up, but it's my understanding that that's not part of the equation. In every chapter of the DEIR, when it came to mitigated measures for that chapter, it was stated when feasible. That's also open-ended. Who's going to determine if it was feasible or not to do what they needed to do? Like it's been stated, when the land was purchased, there was an agreement made that it would be cleaned up. And I've talked about the Southern Pacific side or the rail side of the Baylands being actually cleaned up and not remediated. Mr. Zoloff had mentioned at one of our meetings that we run risks when we have to transport hazardous cleanup from a site through neighborhoods to get it to a disposal site. And my comment to that was, why, when we have a Superfund site in the unregulated landfill, it was almost designated as a Superfund site. I think we need to revisit that to get funding. And I think that the railroad, even though it was sold to UPC, lock, stock, and barrel, has an obligation because they caused environmental damage by releasing chemicals into the ground that at the time was probably not allowed. So what my thought was for the Baylands on that site that has not unregulated landfill but known hazards, why wouldn't they build a conveyor over the railroad tracks, get an area of dirt that they're going to bring over anyway over to the railroad site, and dig a hole in the unregulated landfill and dump the hazardous materials there rather than transporting it off site? That would be a true cleanup for the site. The other thing that I'm concerned with land use is the fact that whatever is built out there, there's no guarantee that the extension from Geneva to 101 is going to be built. Okay, anything that happens out there, that has to be required that connection be made. I will bring up again the idea of annexing the north end of the Baylands to San Francisco for the housing component. For one main reason is that there's no guarantees of water. The SFPUC has said we don't have water for the site, and you know the boondoggle that they've had with Oakdale Water District about acquiring water for the site. That's only going to be good until 2050. And then the state has said that they're going to cut back 40% on water. Okay? We can't have a development that's contingent on getting water from another source, or not another source. It's still going to be SFPUC supplying the water, but it's the allotment that Oakdale Irrigation District has. Okay? That's not okay. If San Francisco built the housing, they'd be required to supply the water. They'd be required to supply the schools. You know, they're going to build a high school over in Candlestick, somewhere over in there, for that development. So there's too much going on. We can't rush it. To do a regional, have a regional impact, we need to do regional, thinking. And, expanding Recology, right now they do dozens of truck trips up to Vacaville. That could have a regional impact. by having them do it here rather than hauling that stuff to Vacaville. Okay, so, we need to take this slow. It would serve the whole region by having a slower approach. And the last thing I'd like to say is high-speed rail wasn't part of the equation when we talked about through the DER and that whole process. It is now. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have no more slips. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak who hasn't yet spoken? Linda Detmer.
Thank you, everybody. I know it's late. I'm tired. I just wanted to offer one thing. Not very long ago, I read an article about a company, some sort of a tech company locally, that offered its employees $10,000 each in moving costs to move out of the area into an affordable area and to telecommute or to work at a smaller office building there or maintain a home-based office in the Bay Area, but have most of the residential where they could have the American dream somewhere in Tracy or Stockton or wherever, and build new communities where people didn't have to commute. I thought that was a fantastic idea, and it makes me think that we need to lay the blame for the housing crisis squarely at the feet of the employers, the large employers who are building and adding and coming and crowding and grabbing, but not taking responsibility for paying their people enough to live here and for providing any kind of housing at all for them. And I really think that's something that we might want to visit at some point as an alternative to building housing here, because there's so many questions that are unanswered. But if more companies could take the responsibility of creating jobs in areas where people could afford to live with the wages that they're paid, I think it'd make a remarkable difference and probably bring prices down in this area for renters and home buyers. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak tonight? No? Great. Well, thank you all for your patience and for all of your comments. We really appreciate them. Thank you. And we're not quite done yet.
I would like to ask the staff just some follow-up. A lot of information tonight. I know that we're going to kind of call it all together. Probably some things can't get answered until you decide upon, or the council decides on some land use direction. But there was a number of things that was mentioned about just being a regional project, and I think a couple people mentioned some of the projects that are going around the Baylands, like Slage Lock, Executive Park, Candlestick. I would like to get the information of how many housing units are being built in each of those spots, and what's the square footage of commercial, and what type of commercial is being built. Is it retail commercial? There's very different types of commercial. And also what the projected cumulative impacts would be on traffic regarding those projects. I know we have that data, but just kind of call it into one funnel. Thank you.
Thank you. Madison?
Yeah, I have a couple follow-up things just so we can start preparing, for deliberations. There was discussion tonight about the feasibility of a solar farm, and both viewpoints about whether it is economically feasible or not. So I would like to get some more information about the feasibility of that in particular, and also we talked about this in the economic section, but I do want to get a feasibility report on the Planning Commission's recommendation. So I had asked for that then. So just a reminder as we're getting ready to deliberate. And let's see. I have been asked by a number of residents, and it was also mentioned here tonight about incorporating Dr. Lee. I don't know if that's something that, would be discussed with the rest of the council, but many people would like the opinion of Dr. Lee in looking at the plan and the information before us. So that might be something that we would want to discuss if that was an extra cost that the council would want to pay for. But it seems like the community has asked, I know privately and tonight publicly, to incorporate Dr. Lee in the discussion. So,
okay, thank you. Any further follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I did have quite a few questions in regards to housing, but it is late. We had anticipated that we might need another meeting in regards to land use, but it seems like we've gotten through all the public comments. So what I can do is just, I have the questions here, and I'll submit them to staff and put it online. As one of the speakers had mentioned, I'm doing office hours. At the last council meeting, I said it was going to be on Wednesdays. There's a conflict this Wednesday coming up, and so we're going to make it this Tuesday at 6 o'clock. I guess depending upon how many people show up, it would be in the conference room at City Hall, or maybe it'll be in here. So I got a feeling it's probably better to be in here, and because I've been listening to all the comments that you've said at the podium, all the emails that have been sent. I mean, I've read everything, and so I want you to know how I'm taking in all the information, and want to be able to bring that back out to all of you. So that's all I want to say.
Okay,
thanks.
Great. So thank you all for sharing your comments. Whether you're a Brisbane resident or live in one of our neighboring communities, all of your opinions really do matter, and we listen to all of them. So we're going to move on to mayor and council matters, and we'll be discussing the city council schedule with respect to the Baylands. So thank you all for your time. Okay, so we all have a copy of the Baylands hearing schedule. So the next placeholder was May 23rd. So it sounds like we don't have a need for that unless there's anyone who wants.
Are we going to use that for the community presentations?
Yeah, you can use that for to start the community presentations. We're anticipating that we're going to need at least 2 nights for that. So if you do it on the 23rd, you may be able to actually get rid of the meeting on the 15th or the 7th or the 15th. But I since we had the 23rd schedule, unless there's some reason you want to cancel it, I'd go ahead with it, and we'd start at least some of the community presentations. I know the applicant himself would like to have a significant amount of time, and we might be able to put that in on the 23rd and get that done. And I think there's a couple other speakers that might make sense that night. We've already contacted many of the community groups and told them that we would be doing it on the 7th, I believe. So we'll probably keep that on the 7th, and then maybe do the applicant and a couple of the other speakers that are relative to that on the 23rd, and then then we'd have that done.
I'll just need to be done by 10:30, so it's great.
We'll
that
start at 6:30. So if he isn't done by 10:30, I don't know. It's on him.
Come on, Jonathan, I need your help here.
That should be enough time. Sure.
On the schedule, the Krebel presentation was supposed to be on the 23rd, and then we were told it's on the 7th. So we are preparing it for the 7th of June. And I hear a lot of questions that you are asking for instance, a presentation on the cumulative impacts, and you don't seem to be aware of the NREL study on the feasibility of solar. So I think, why don't you use the 23rd for those extra things that you want, and then continue do the community presentations as planned on the 7th of June. That's my preference.
Yeah, I don't want the stuff I asked for, Anya, until we start council deliberations. I want that then, not to have it presented by staff to go over and hash. You know what I mean?
I guess I didn't understand.
We want to discuss it, which we can only do
after
in deliberations.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's enough community group presentations.
We're going to have both nights.
That we could split that between the 2 nights.
But we want to hear, as a community, we want to have a proper hearing and able to testify about those those cumulative impacts, and to respond to the concern about the EPA NREL study, which did have remediation costs involved in the calculations. So there's data that obviously has not been presented to you, and I do think you need an extra meeting for that.
Okay, so I think we can, like you suggested, to start on May. We'll have May 23rd, the applicant and some other community groups that may be available, and then have a second meeting for community presentations on June 7th. And then on June 10th, our Bayland Speakers Workshop. That's over a weekend, I believe a Saturday, correct?
Correct.
That's going to be from approximately, what time, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m.?
9 to 4, yeah, with
Okay.
a lunch break.
With lunch. And then June 15th would be,
We could cancel that one.
okay,
Potentially.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, I'd leave it there just
That's a
for the moment.
placeholder.
We'll-
This is a place
for applicant and community group presentations. And then June 19th, Bayland City Council deliberations process.
So, just to follow up on what Anya said, Clark and I were on the same wavelength of having that information in preparation for deliberations, because these are some key issues we want to obviously discuss. But I also see the value in having a hearing so that people in the public can comment too. So I think maybe we should kind of discuss whether we want to have a public hearing that kind of talks about miscellaneous questions that we have that haven't been answered, that we've asked for follow-up information on, or whether we should just take that information and discuss it during deliberations. I'm fine with either scenario, but I do want to be sensitive that the community has asked for has asked to discuss certain topics that we haven't discussed yet. So maybe the 15th.
That's what I was looking
we
at.
could do for that if the council agrees that that's reasonable.
That'd be fine with me.
That works.
So during the Planning Commission deliberations, didn't they also allow time while they were in deliberations to have some public comment during those hearings, so that it wasn't just a one-sided conversation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would, if the question is whether you're going to continue to have public comment while you're deliberating, I'm assuming you would.
Just incorporate information during the process.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of, with regards to the questions, going back to our last time we talked about this, we said we're still trying to work with the subcommittee because we have to kind of organize all that. So, I mean, there's that piece of it. And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we had given you the NREL study recently. If not, I'll make sure you get another copy of it. If you haven't got it, let me, because it's not
No, I
that.
got it.
Okay,
Got it,
all right.
yeah.
So
I'm
you all
sure-
have that. Okay.
I'm sure everybody got it. So, I mean, that was part of one of our packages, so.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure you.
I guess that concern will come out more in deliberations, because
Sure.
there's argument here about what are the facts tonight. So, from people that I think are very knowledgeable. So,
Okay, I just wanted to make
So-
sure you actually had the report, though. So.
yeah.
I think
I gotta
we
tell
have
you, I thought I was
received it.
observing ping pong. There was no in between, no net balls. It was just doom, 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 doom.
So if we leave the calendar with all these dates, then, I mean, I understand you want to, you're going to probably have a night where you're going to be discussing kind of the, the questions and kind of how you're going to process some of these questions. That sounds a little opaque, but I mean, the problem that we're running into is that a lot of the questions are ultimately dependent upon where you go with a land use. And I think we had this discussion with the Baylands Subcommittee. So we're going to try to answer everything that we can, and we're going to certainly want to focus in on those kind of core things that the council wants to get at, because if you do decide ultimately to go in the direction of just doing a general plan amendment at this point in time, that's a very different conversation and very different types of analyses that are going to be needed as opposed to approving a specific plan, which is much more specific. It's really going to ultimately depend on which direction you're going to want to go into. But I mean, we'll get into that in more detail. I certainly, dedicated to the council that we're going to try to answer every question you've got that you want to get answered. We don't want the council frustrated. We don't want the community frustrated. We're going to do our very best, but there has been an impressive avalanche of questions in this process.
Okay, so then on June 15th, are you anticipating that you'd have in written format answers to our questions so that we could have that as a miscellaneous?
I don't want to commit to anything at the moment.
Okay.
Maybe it should go back to the subcommittee to discuss how best to tackle some of these
that's
questions.
Our intention.
Okay, so we'll leave June 15th open for some topic.
Yeah.
But we don't know what yet.
It's fluid.
Okay.
Gotta
Very
remember,
good.
Clay's a non-union plumber.
Okay, so moving on to written communications. I want to acknowledge receipt of written communications regarding the Brisbane Baylands project. Between April 6th and May 4th, 2017, we received the following written correspondence. From William McMullen on April 14th, Beth Grossman on April 24th, Bill Detmer on April 27th, Danny Ames on May 1st, Barbara Ebel on May 1st, Danny Ames on May 2nd, Danny Ames again on May 2nd, California Department of Housing and Community Development on May 2nd, Assemblymember David Chu on May 3rd, Lisa Snyder on May 3rd, David Crabb on May 3rd, Danny Ames on May 3rd, Tenderloin Neighborhood Corporation on May 4th, Marcus Conan on May 4th, and I also want to note that I did receive a phone call from Assemblymember David Chu, and we spoke about the issues that he addressed in his letter. So that is the written correspondence, and unless there's anything further.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.